This is the Oasis Center for Wellbeing podcast on what climate change means for us locally and what we can do about it. We have just listened to a video of Professor Katharine Hayhoe, who is, I think, one of the most outstanding climate change communicators out there. I think she's earned her stripes as, among other things, Time's most influential people, 100 most influential people. So we're going to recap a little bit what she talked about, and then I'm going to have a conversation with fellow psychologist Bruce Bonecutter here in Chicago, and we're going to talk about how we sort of work with the kinds of concepts that Katharine Hayhoe is recommending that we work with as we tackle the pressing issue of climate change. So I'm going to start with my recap, and then, Bruce, if you think I've missed anything, I will have you supplement. Sorry?
I'm ready to do that.
Okay, great. So I think that a lot of what she is recommending is that we speak in terms that people can relate to about climate change, terms that are personal, lived, relevant, which of course means local, things that people are already experiencing as opposed to something that may arise, 50, 100 years down the line. Things that are meaningful in people's lives, not terribly data-oriented, and also not frightening. Certainly, I know I've seen a lot of communication about environmental problems that goes in the direction of, here's the really scary scenario we're looking at. So she's really recommending that we personalize what we talk about, and that talking about climate change is one of the most important things we can do, and that in talking about it, we also talk about what solutions are available to people, the momentum that we already have, the traction we already have, how people can sort of join in to the momentum that's already been generated, and feel like they're kind of part of a collective process, and that sort of discovering those on-ramps to momentum that's already gathered can be empowering. I don't love that word, but I do feel like I have personally experienced that myself, and I feel like it's a very different reason to get involved that is rewarding than to say do it out of a sense of guilt, which again I feel like is a lot of what's talked about in relation to environmental matters, that it's sort of, people get sort of shamed into action. So I think that would be my summary. Synthesis. So Bruce, what did I miss?
I think that was very wise. People are more likely to go towards something that they find rewarding and growthful than they are to try to avoid something that is very, very scary. I think we'll need to talk about it, and there will be times that we'll have to have some scary data. But one of the take-homes that I had from her talk, and please, if you're listening to this, her talk tonight was wonderful. Her TED Talk is worth finding, and the perhaps Dr. Warren can help me with the reference, but the weirding,
global weirding.
Global Weirdings series
yes.
are just delightful as to how to get going. So don't be alone. There's lots to support you. All these videos can help. The point I was trying to make is that people will be scared. It's important to have solutions and positives in mind. When the only thing that I would add that she didn't speak too much, and I would be curious, maybe I can back channel her and others, is in talking about other social responsibility issues. There's a lot of intersectionality, intersecting with climate change. For example, I volunteer a lot in Lawndale in Chicago, and the fact that toxic waste was dumped there, industries without really great OSHA standards were there, but they provided jobs, but they also provided risk. And there are solutions. There are economic enrichment zones. And in an economic enrichment zone, you can bring in some, well, let's ecologically build this place up. Let's help get some of the lead out of the paint. Let's get some of the things going. And I do think a solution-focused motif is one of the strong suits that she provided. So that even if I'm talking to my conservative friends, and I go fishing. I try to talk with grew up in Michigan where I have lots of Republican friends, and I remember progressive Republicans. So I don't want to just slam one party. And as long as I said that, I will also say that I had very conservative friends on the blue side of the aisle as well. Anyway, in talking with people that are tentative about climate change, agreeing that there are some local problems that we need to influence, like are people from the overheated South and the overheated West and the likely to flood South going to be likely to immigrate more and more into the Midwest? What does that mean to our economy? Stuff like that is already starting to happen, and I think we can prepare locally, but there's a chance just to say, well, can we help them out with the reason that they're needing to come in? And can we take another look at the facts? And I'm going to mention one book that was written, and I see it on the shelves of others, Factfulness, Hans Rosling, and then he has passed, and his children, Ola and Anna, have talked about ways of respecting facts without getting into power struggles. So those are a couple things that I would add. In addition to stressing the solution-focused nature of things, also remembering that it intersects with other social issues that are close. Lawndale is very close. And that there's a way of presenting facts that we can all take a look at and agree upon are a couple things that I would stress. So thanks for listening.
Yeah, I feel like there are a lot of things that all of us, no matter where we are in the Midwest region or Chicagoland, like, a lot of people have experienced basement flooding, and that is really stressful. And, there's days and days of work, and there's mold abatement, and, you lose stuff, and, it's just really challenging. And, it has to do with the fact that we're getting more precipitation, and sometimes rain is falling on ground that's frozen, and so it can't be absorbed into the ground, and so where does it go? It goes into our basements, or ice. There's, a lot more precipitation that then freezes, and it becomes more treacherous for us to walk and drive, and actually, as a result of climate change, there are more orthopedic injuries. I can't tell you how many people I know who've broken wrists, because they've slipped and fallen, and that ice wouldn't have been there, not as much of it. So there are all these things that are,
Yeah, like just on the flooding and the precipitation. Amen to what you just said, Dr. Warren. But in addition, there are short-term fixes for Lord knows the roads and streets with the freeze thaw and all the potholes that we experience. And then you're right. I don't know in the suburbs and the city where I have lots of friends how many basements have flooded. And the good news for the construction companies that are advertising vigorously on how to solve those problems, we need to do that. But it's an opportunity to not get on a soapbox, but to say, gee, if we could slow this down a little bit, we could do two things. We can take care of the immediate risk, but, wouldn't it be great if we could take a 5-10 year plan and see if we can incentivize corporations to get on board with slowing the climate extremes that are there. And so I think sometimes there's a window and an openness to let's take another look at the data and see if we can do good, in addition to them calling, I won't mention the name of companies that do the cleanup from the gritted mold and also the foundation work. And my wife and I have spent a fair amount of money on foundation work and trying to get the floods away. So short-term and long-term perspective, and agreeing that, the floods and the icing and the ideas of broken pavement and the ideas of slip fall are increasing in the Midwest. And that's a local phenomenon that ties to what's in it for us to take a look at this, what's in it for us to look at climate change as something that's a nearby factor, not a far distant or some politically driven factor, but it's a life factor that we have to deal with daily.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've found in my own experience is I talked about my not so favorite term, empowerment, but one of the most empowering things that I experienced after I realized that climate change posed a threat to my children's health and well-being was I wrote a letter to then Senator Obama's office. I sent it to his environmental legislative assistant. It was like a 2-page letter, and it was quite personal. I mean, I talked about my kids. I talked about his kids. And his environmental legislative assistant called me. And we had a series of conversations over a period of months. And I literally, I'd always voted, from the time I turned 18, but I had no idea that I could write a letter and a U.S. Senator, environmental legislative assistant could be interested in talking to me as an ordinary citizen. And it altered my sense of myself as not just being a tiny little meaningless grain of sand among voters. And one of the things that I learned, I did a little bit of training on how to talk to elected officials, and that a significant piece of how to reach legislators is by telling our stories. And that they are interested in our stories. And we all have stories. we all have stories. Every single one of us has stories. And I think that's really cool that, like, you know, we have stories and we can make use of our stories. And to do so can make a difference, and that can just be a really powerful experience.
It's really important that I'm really glad that you took the time to open up and tell the story. My experience with legislators is that in addition to what I can write, or, you know, I've been around the APA and IPA, and they have lots of wonderful leave behind DVDs and fact sheets and so on, is I found it very rewarding to spend the time talking to someone in, I'm just down the street from one of the senators in Illinois, Don Harmon's office. And so I find it very useful to, if I am trying to leave a message, that I spend some time talking to the aides that are actually in the office. And I've found that they're charming, they're interested, they do want to hear my story. They actually take notes. I go like, well, no, I'm just a guy in the neighborhood. But it's very worthwhile. It's probably partly the psychologist in me. I want to hear a little bit about their story. Now they're hesitant to do that a bit, but you know, they're charming and interesting folks as well. And my experience is that there's usually kind of a very nice hierarchy. There's some that are mentors of the others. They're a little older in the office. And then there are some that are brand new and coming up. And in the human dialogue with them, I have never come away feeling disrespected. I've often come away with collecting a whole lot of resources and people that they can think of that I might want to network with and contact with. And they're very aware of liberal conservative splits on issues, and climate change is one of them. And they're aware of where the dialogue can take place civilly, politely, with facts, with constructive focus. And it's in that space that I really think that we should live. And they're a resource at helping us find that space, because I feel so kind of tribalized otherwise. So I strongly second be in touch with your legislator. If you can't be in touch with your legislator, sometimes I almost feel like it's really great to be in touch with their assistant, because I think, like Paul Simon once said to me, is that he has 18 seconds to learn about everything. Whatever comes before he has 18 seconds. And so he has to rely heavily on his associates. So finding the social service or the client science. Finding the client science expert in the office, man, primo, way to go. And the person at the office will know who that is. So there's no wrong entrance.
Yeah, and it's possible to form a relationship with these people. Right. And again, before I had this experience, I had no idea that, there were real people there with whom one could have an ongoing relationship. And that I think is valuable in its own right, to have those relationships. And the other thing is, in terms of, again, sort of like what one voice can do, I have a friend who early in her career was an legislative assistant to Tammy Baldwin, who's now who's now in Washington. And what I learned from this friend of mine is that literally one person's story can tip a vote. One person's story. So I think we tend to think in terms of they're flooded, right, with calls and letters and, emails, and, we all get these things in our inboxes, send this click through and send a note to your, the legislator, and that actually those have less power than our individual voices. And not one voice won't necessarily tip it, but one voice can.
Right. Psychologists forget kind of normal conversation, and we think about the science and the numbers and probabilities and graphs and statistics and comparison groups and all kinds of stuff. I think that stuff does come second. In fact, that was part of the podcast today, is that people telling their story, how climate change affects them, how a partial solution that they've come up with seems hopeful. That's the stuff that grabs people's attention and lowers anxiety, lowers fear, lowers all the barriers to being receptive, and only secondarily would data be of use. And a lot of communicators, that's what they'll do. They'll tell a good story, a good anecdote, and enter there. So I think that's actually another good point to emphasize, and it may be a good place to wrap up and consider what your story is. Right.
Yep, and that we all have stories, whether we're chatting with our neighbors or journalists or legislative assistants. We all have stories, and there's value in sharing them, and it's also part of we connect as human beings by sharing our stories, which is powerful in its own right.
Right. Yeah. It's the human touch, and it's very proactive and supportive, as compared to being hostile and scary. So definitely, amen.
Well, on that note, we will wrap up. Thank you so much, Bruce Bonecutter, for being on this conversation and sharing your own experiences and insights. And I absolutely second that it is so worth looking at Katharine Hayhoe's global weirding series, which addresses a whole array of subjects, and then her TED Talk, TED Women, from 2018, goes into more depth about her work as a climate scientist who's really interested in bringing the message of this as a crisis about which we can all make a contribution. So thank you.
Yeah, and thanks to all who have listened and are going to watch these things, because I think it's important to run in the direction of hope and action. So let's get focused on hope and action. So thank you very much, Dr. Warren.
Thanks, Dr. Bonecutter. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.